Hey guys, if you want to invest in real estate and not go to jail, please watch this video. I came across a group online that teaches creative finance and really cool ways to pick up properties on the surface. Everybody loves a get rich quick kind of idea. And it came to my attention through multiple sources, including coaches in my program, that there was illegitimate or unethical and potentially illegal deals that was happening within this group. I only investigated because the person who's like front and center proponent of this type of methodology started lying about Airbnb. And you guys know that that's my space. And since I'm ADHD and I've got a justice and sensitivity, I decided to look this guy up finally after hearing for years that this guy might not have been on the up and up. And just today, somebody sent me this post, and I'm going to paraphrase it for you as you can read it on screen. But the guy said, hey, I sold a portfolio of 3 properties through a subject to plus seller finance structured through a land trust. And my mortgage company is now forcing me to pay off my entire mortgage by the end of the month. Now, this is really honestly sad to see. The legal implications for this are huge. And I did not want to make my career tearing down anybody. But, somebody had to attack Jordan Belfort. Somebody had to get Bernie Madoff. You know what I mean? And in this case, I'm finding myself kind of in a spot to speak out about this because no one else will. So this is maybe my cross to bear, and it'll cost me followers potentially, but somebody has to have this conversation. First, yes, let's recognize that a subject to deal is not fraud in itself. And having a property and you putting it into a land trust also is not fraud in itself. But when somebody makes a trust to put a property into a trust in order to then sell the trust to a buyer to conceal the fact that the property is being sold or that the interest is being transferred, that is called fraudulent concealment, because the intent is to not let the lender know that the terms of the agreement have changed. And the lender has right to pull the mortgage and call it due if those terms change, subject to being one of those, or any sale at all being one of those. So if you want to arm yourself with logic, yes, it's not the subject to that's fraud. It's not a trust itself that's fraud, but it is the intent to deceive that is fraud. But if we go back to this post, it actually goes deeper. The guy not only structured a subject to deal through a land trust, like he confessed to mortgage fraud already in this post, but he also said that he also did seller finance. Now this could be a wraparound loan where the seller financed the additional equity, or like a seller carryback. And this is what one of the subject to community members tried to get my coach to agree to, which was to take a property and get a mortgage on it called a DSCR loan. So let's say there's $1 million property. You could go and get a loan for that $1 million property based on the income it could generate on Airbnb or as a long-term rental. And you could get 75% of that value loaned. Now, the buyer would get $500,000 of equity loaned from the owner, and then a $750,000 mortgage where he only needed $500,000, so the extra $250,000 is cash, right? So now the buyer gets $250,000 of cash, but owes 125% of the property's value in debts between the lender and the original seller. This is heavy-duty mortgage fraud. The lender would never agree to put a loan on a property where you already have a pre-existing debt product on it, where now the lender doesn't have the proper collateralization. There's 125% loan-to-value debt on the property. A lender would never say yes to that. That's why it's immediately mortgage fraud. And this guy has alluded to doing some form of subject to / seller finance hybrid. It's very likely the same type of seller carryback deal that my coach got prospected to. And this is super important, guys, because if there are people in the world right now coaching like an entry level subject to, like on the basis of its like illegality arguably, but then as you go further down the cult rabbit hole, they start getting you to do something called the Gator method, which is where you loan people earnest money deposit like cash. But again, that is mortgage fraud too, because if the lender does not know that a wholesaler even has borrowed the earnest money deposit and didn't have their own money, it is a misrepresentation of the buyer's assets, because a wholesale flip is a double close, right? So the wholesaler's on the line for being factual about his assets, and so is the end buyer, right? So even if the wholesaler borrowed the earnest money deposit from the end buyer, he would still have to disclose that to the lender. And to not disclose that to the lender is fraud. So we've got these fancy guys on the internet who seem really nice on the surface. They seem just so nice, so apple pie. And you pay for a course that teaches you subject to. And one of the primary principles of influence is confirmation bias. So you've already put money down into a thing, and they slowly turn you into a fraudster by convincing you to do something called the Gator method, where you loan $1,500 out at a time and you make really quick cash. But it's kind of illicit, and you probably won't get caught because it's so small potatoes, but they start to warm you up to doing fraudulent activities. And then by the end of it, you're talking sellers into selling a house to you where the seller could get their loan called, but you don't really care about the seller, do you? Because you just wanted to buy the property and you're so attuned to this thing. And then you're even trying to get the seller to give you some seller finance so you can get cash out of the deal. You put $0 down on a property and you find a way to fraudulently get a couple $100,000 of cash, ta-da. And if the seller gets rolled up on, that's theirs, right? Fuck them. And then you got the cash and you run off and the seller gets put out. This is insanely unethical, and we need to stop this. And we need to stop promoting influencers that are promoting unethical behavior. And it really does suck that I've seen so much resistance to just holding someone accountable, to looking at the paperwork, looking at the documents. Why is such a large portion of the online community so averse to keeping people honest? Right? And I think it is that whole investment, like, oh, I like this guy Pace, and I like this subject to thing, it's easy money, and there are times where it might not be fraud, so I'm going to defend the entirety of the industry with like a potential hypothetical anecdote that never happens. I've actually never seen an ethical, completely clean subject to deal. The only ones I've ever seen are ones where the seller is pure at risk for their loan getting rolled up on because they breached their contract. That's the bare minimum. Otherwise, I've seen it get worse, seen it turn into fraud like this original post that I just shared. So share this with your friends, educate them that getting into the subject to community is stepping into an ever increasingly warm pot of water that's slowly going to boil, and at the boiling point you are committing crimes. And you want to avoid that because it's your conscience, it's your soul on the line. Thanks for your time. Have a good day.